Alright, this is coming out a bit late because my microphone here is having a stroke and it's just it's fluctuating between loud and quiet sometimes, and I can't get it to perfectly record, and I didn't realize that the last week of videos have been super quiet. But nevertheless, we're going to be reacting to an anomaly called Watch Out for Your Quicks. I hope everyone's having a good day, and let's get into this. The following account is one of the chapters from the book I can't read that. Res Recipustis de la Real. Responses from the Real by Jack Allen Miller. Oh, this has to follow with okay. So if you don't know what the Real is, we've already reacted to season 1. This is season 2. There is this thing called the Real where you as okay, hold on. Bad wording. Okay. The real is the real version of reality, right? And it's saying that we as humans, when we get older, are unable to see this version of reality, but through technology and through changing our minds, we can eventually see it. And they ran an experiment on a girl to see if she could see it and the ramifications of it, and it burned her face off. So let's see what this one's going to be about, because that was the last one, is they made a machine to see into the real and it took her face off.
When my travels to Buenos Aires became much more frequent due to work and mainly academic matters, I had the opportunity to firsthand experience the impact of Jacques Lacan's teachings in Argentina. Likewise, my friendship with Mrs. Diana Rabinovich allowed, in her immense generosity regarding my dissemination work of Parisian psychoanalysis, to approach many other men and women who were dedicated to studying the phenomenon of the real in a particular manner. Among them, I found a significant number of Brazilian psychoanalysts who, due to various circumstances, ended up developing their careers in Argentine lands. Kleber de Amaral was one of them, very close to Mrs. Rabinovich.
Oh.
As well as to the board of the Lacanian Orientation School. Kleber also knew Matthias de Souza Bruckner, who led years ago the only expedition of our discipline to the depths of the Amazon, of which possibly not many have been aware due to the difficulties in publishing the original manuscripts and transcribing Jacques Lacan's interventions in Caracas.
Interesting. So we're gonna see their journey into the Amazon.
Of the expedition's results at the time, that the European Psychoanalytic Association took part in a sanctioned note towards the Brazilian Academy for improperly intervening in the investigative work that had been carried out until then on behalf of psychoanalysis. Unfortunately, Jacques Lacan passed away a few months after his only conference in Latin America. Had that happened about 10 years earlier, we would have had material of utmost interest for the Lacanian cause. It is, inspired by that scenario, that accompanied by Kleber de Amaral and Professor Emiliano Ritter, of whom I will make solemn mention in his memory later on, we embarked on the reissue of the expedition that in 1979 was made with unexpected and enlightening results about the nature of the purest and wildest state of what has been defined with some difficulty as the real.
Okay.
However, I must make a point of detail. Our expedition took place in much more remote lands.
So they did an expedition out here on the Amazons, and they found more of the real. So we do know that it has been, I don't want to say leaking through, but they figured out that with enough anticipation, they treated mannequins like tulpas. If you don't know what a tulpa is, it's basically like a ghost. Right? It's a manifestation of a ghost. If you manifest something hard enough, it becomes... you can turn an entity into a tulpa, basically, is what it did. And so, they did. They turned a bunch of mannequins into tulpas, and they became, basically, the entities from the real, and some of them were not fine to the people they interacted with, other ones got murked. And we're now going to see another instance, I guess, of the real leaking in, and this time it's in the Amazons. And I'm kind of curious, because I'm assuming it's about to be like horrific creatures. There's no way this wouldn't
lands
be.
Than those traveled by Professor
There's no way.
to which we were recommended to enter from the Peruvian routes, taking advantage that in the same year, I speak of 2004, we were invited together with Mrs. Rabinovich to an international symposium on psychoanalysis at the Cayetano Heredia Peruvian University, where we also presented the first volume translated into Spanish of the unpublished corpus on the neurology project proposed by Henri Poisser and completed 3 years later, in 1958, by Donald Winnicott. It was in a small cafe on Carlos Basadre Street in Lima where I met Kleber de Amaral after our first conversation in Buenos Aires. A week before we began our journey to the Brazilian Amazon, Kleber handed me extensive documentation that had been compiled between 2001 and 2003 by scholars from the Brazilian Psychoanalysis Association, who decided to continue analyzing Matthias de Souza Bruckner's reports, making between 8 to 10 trips to the state of Acre, where vast historical descriptions suggested the existence of tribes sharing similar characteristics with those visited and studied in 1979.
Okay.
Kleber de Amaral was interested in me joining at least one of the expedition caravans and, due to my well-known relevance in the dissemination of Lacanian studies, considering this a unique opportunity for the academic development of the matter concerning the real, bringing both his team's preliminary conclusions and mine to meetings in New York and Paris. I must emphasize that in these latter places, there was little news of Latin American research on the development of psychoanalysis, which, as Mrs. Rabinovich told me, were often dismissed from the general forum discussion, relegated to secondary discussion tables, and, honestly, aroused little interest among the few attendees. We decided that a good starting date for our journey would be the first weeks of March, to thus avoid the harsh storms that often hinder the crossing through the Amazonian border between Peru and Brazil. Our journey took 3 days, during which we had to traverse the rugged slopes where the Andes Mountains kiss the virgin jungle and merge into a thick blanket of vegetation and untamed nature.
Okay.
Crossing the border on the only plane connecting the Peruvian city of Pucallpa, the last urban oasis, to Tarauacá Airport in Brazilian lands. Once there, we faced a 4-hour car trip to the town of Cruzeiro do Sul, where we would be staying with Kleber de Amaral, Emiliana Ritter, and the guides from the Brazilian Association. During the journey, we were not immune to unforeseen events. Emiliana Ritter suffered a serious setback due to his diabetes. It was as unforeseen as the journey itself that we had embarked onto the Amazon. Our trip experienced a slight delay with the return to Tarauacá, where Emiliano stayed for 2 nights until local doctors advised him to seek assistance in Lima. My friend's decision was risky, knowing his health condition. But he did well to take the first flight to the Peruvian capital, and from there, not many days later, returned to Rosario and take care of his diabetes. The mishap kept us on edge until Mrs. Rabinovich, who was still in Lima, notified us, with certain days of delay naturally, that Emiliano Ritter had crossed the border in good condition and had already been assisted at the General Hospital. Only then could we consider our expedition to have begun.
So one person is out of the expedition so far.
Had mentioned to me that we would visit an indigenous settlement in the locality of Bom Jesus, about a 2-hour journey by montaria, a type of rustic canoe made from ceibo wood, which due to its properties would allow us to ford the irregular courses of the Rio Azul. That was the only way to get there. As one would expect on trips like this, the journey took us almost twice the budgeted time. The late summer rains had considerably widened the riverbed just a few days before our arrival in Brazil, and any attempt to speed up the pace could have caused an unnecessary tragedy. Bom Jesus was the administrative name given by the state of Acre to a locality delineated only on maps and in demographic records. The indigenous community there hadn't even given a name to the land they inhabited. And were it not for the peace agreements of 1956, to this day, they would be unaware of being part of a nation, even if they were completely unaware of such a concept and many others. My first encounter with the community was surprisingly more pleasant than I expected. It seems that both Kleber and our companions from the association had been engaging in long conversations with the indigenous people for some time through excellent translators. They were even aware that more people would come to study their customs, traditions, and stories about beyond the river, which was the way to
Beyond the
refer
river
to
is
those sacred
interesting as a
phenomena
term.
they had
They have
worshipped
it
for
quoted.
countless ages. It was
I'll
more
knock that
than
over.
pleasing
That's
to know
fine.
that they never exhibited aggressive behavior. In fact, Kleber had mentioned to me during our conversation at the cafe in Lima that some of the indigenous people were so excited about the arrival of foreign men that, contrary to what one might think, many of them believed they were being rescued from the Urksel. Days later, I would understand the fear of these men.
The Urcha?
Kleber de Amaral kindly introduced me to some of the tribe's leaders, who stood out from the others by their long black robes and pompous ornaments.
I don't know,
hanging
that just
from their
looks like a
necks.
cult attire.
Apparently, any group that managed to communicate with the Urksal and not suffer the unknown consequences of contact claimed the right to make the most important decisions for the tribe. However, leading the group meant testing their physical and mental strength with each full moon, when they had to return to the Urkel and attempt to hunt it down. For this reason, tribal chieftains rarely remained in their position for more than 2 or 3 moons. On my second day in Bom Jesus, Kleber and some translators invited me to explore some of the rarities hidden in the vast Amazon. Not much further to the north, the indigenous people had discovered, hidden by the thick tangle of roots and branches, true walls of undocumented fortifications. Hundreds of stone blocks rose to a height of 6 to 8 meters. Some of these seemed to have been cut in series with precise angles, which I would dare to say could be millimeter straight. Others, on the other hand, took more irregular shapes, but followed patterns reminiscent of stalagmites, also rising as enormous walls in small caves. The indigenous people believed that this was the work of Urksal, because for them, the universe was the result of its existence and will. With this discovery, I began to notice that the tribe exhibited certain traits similar to monotheism. However, as would become clear to me in the coming days, Urksal was not a traditional deity
That's
in
pretty
the most
fucking cool though
academic
as a
sense
monster
of the
design.
term,
Because you can see the fucking eyes and it looks like either a mouth or like a beak.
but rather a cosmic force that, in its omnipotence, had created that wild and impenetrable world to test its
what the
own
fuck is that
existence
face
through
now?
punishments and horrors to those
it
who were condemned to
split
survive
open?
in its mazes. In the following days, together with Kleber, Renan, one of the translators, and accompanied by some men from the tribe, we made several trips on Monteria towards the east, following the course of the Blue River until reaching an area where the jungle seemed to open up, and the river turned into a wide expanse of dark waters. The indigenous people told us that for them, the world ended when the arboreal prison came to an end, where Urksal had poisoned the sky, the waters,
The sky and
the land.
waters of what?
And that version held much truth. At that point in the river, the current had become slow and thick at the touch of the oar. The
What?
waters suddenly turned black and oily as if it were petroleum. Likewise, on the banks, massive mounds of dark ground crowned with perfect golden blocks stacked haphazardly on top of each other.
Gold?
The indigenous people warned us that these were nothing more than illusions, a vile mirage of Urksal to trap any outsider into his labyrinth. These
Interesting.
formations were even found in small cavernous entrances hidden where
That's fucking cool though that it can just manifest all this. If that's true and this isn't real, that's fucking dope because
the
it
river
would trap
narrowed
anybody.
in, arranged like sacred jaws. It struck me that the men of the tribe, under the assumption that their deity was a product of folkloric magical thinking, were aware that men from more advanced civilizations were extremely vulnerable to the allure of gold.
Yo.
For most of
Which
my
is
stay
smart.
with the tribe, I must
That thing
confess,
learns.
I
It knows.
remained respectfully skeptical. In my thoughts, every story was nothing more than the product of their obvious isolation and the limited
Okay, but they know that gold is
socio-cognitive
important.
development
How
of
would
the
they?
indigenous people.
Come on,
This
man.
became
Come
evident when studying their cosmological understanding and the simplicity with which everything was resolved, both from what prompted certainty as well as ignorance to the figure of Urksal. I even dared to think that their docile behavior and apparent good faith were nothing more than the expression of a previous state, of a certain primitivism of the cerebral structures that make man prone to suspicion. My musings on their traditions, to my chilling surprise, came to an abrupt end on the 5th day of the expedition. It was here that all my years of exhausting study were revealed to me from the underestimated experience of trauma. In the inevitable contact with that reality that subsists in the deepest recesses of the world, where for primitive man it manifests in incomprehensible forms, and from there arise, in an attempt to symbolize them, all kinds of deities and specters. It happened on the last journey of our expedition, following the current north of Bom Jesus to the place where men feared to cross. The itinerary of that day included a visit to the border of the known world, where Urkshol became inevitable. It took us about 5 hours to reach the point marked as the portal, where huge towers appeared without warning, which, making a visual estimate, reached 40 or 50 meters in height. Bearing a particular resemblance to ciliary structures, they rose from the lushness of the jungle in various shapes and textures. Some, I could even assure, had been constructed with corroded metals of complex elaboration. The indigenous people feared these towers, claiming that they were the ever-watchful eyes of Urkshol, lover of lightning and storms.
I'm trying to, I
That
don't know, I
appeared
was thinking
before
like
me
it
made
looks like
any
it could be an
sense.
actual building
I
type
was
thing, but I
absolutely
don't know.
certain that in nature, no structure could take such a form, and that if built by humans, it would require at least some capacity in intellect and motor skills to raise such a rarity. In that moment of ecstasy, Renan interrupted
'Cause
my
I don't know what that's
confused
made out of, I'm
thoughts
confused.
to ask me, through the intermediary of the accompanying indigenous person, if I wished to descend into the lands of Urkshol and thus gather some records and take unprecedented photographs. I returned the question with the apprehension that whatever inhabited beyond implied a danger of certain irresponsibility.
Yeah.
However, it had been a night of the new moon.
Full moon?
On the other side of the river, the jungle began to constrict again, and unlike the rest of the days when we went out to explore the jungle, we all had to carry an oar to mark the land every 50 steps we took north, until we reached 250. Although the men of the tribe possessed a basic mechanism for counting numbers and understanding the abstraction of mathematics, Renan told me that it had not been too difficult to agree that, through the symbolic transaction of signals, it was possible to infer what such and such quantity meant for the indigenous people. At first, I thought that the prohibition of crossing beyond 250 steps was some arbitrary figure, but I didn't take long to realize that I was completely mistaken once again. The indigenous person warned us that from any point when encountering the eyes of Urkshol at 250,
I do want to point out that this guy, this absolute foreigner, has walked into this place and thought these people nothing but stupid. It's like, they were warning you and trying to make sure you don't die, and he has looked down upon them every single turn. I hope he dies.
steps in the direction we chose, the sentinel of the
Like, these
lands
people are too
would appear
stupid to
us.
learn. Like, bro,
A
what?
monolith of almost 3 meters with the inscribed face of Urkshol. About 3 years before having the privilege of meeting Kleber Dalmarao, Mrs. Diana Rabinovich had extended a special invitation to me. A small informal gathering among members of the psychology department at the University of Buenos Aires and guests from France and Brazil would be held at her house. There, we briefly discussed Professor de Souza Bruckner's expedition and our interest in traveling to the Amazon one day. Mrs. Rabinovich had correspondence neatly stored in her office desk. Among
why
her
are we going back
hundreds
to
of
this?
documents, she showed us several unpublished photographs from the expedition, including some that were never presented at the Caracas intervention in 1979. Most of these related to moments of relaxation and humor. Nothing too serious or truly interesting considering the significance of that milestone in psychoanalysis. But one photo caught my attention powerfully. It depicted a woman posing for the camera next to a huge monolith with exact characteristics to the one I would come face to face with 3 years later.
That's
In
fucking
both,
dope, though.
a face with humanoid features could be seen, elongated both in frontal and mandibular
Like,
structure.
look how fucking cool that is.
From it, at least 100 filaments
Like, I want to call it a worm, but at the same time, like, these weird spikes coming out, I don't get the effect of a worm. More like a centipede, maybe? I don't... We've seen the body looks like a centipede, so it could just be the centipede, but I'm not sure this is the actual creature. I'm pretty sure this is called one of the eyes.
Between
I'm pretty sure
garnet
this
and
is just one of the
purple could
eyes.
easily measure a meter. Its organic appearance resembled the texture and plasticity of a centipede or some microorganism with velvety membrane. Matthias de Souza Bruckner may have encountered one of Urxel's sentinels almost 20 years earlier.
Yeah, so it was.
I asked through Renan if I was allowed to approach the monolith somewhat in order to examine it more closely. The indigenous people responded fearfully that merely being in the place already posed a certain risk, and that it would never be a good decision to insinuate any intention in front of Urxel's emissaries. Somehow, perhaps Renan, one of the indigenous people, or myself, accidentally crossed the last and forbidden frontier.
There it is.
Moved by some kind of force that altered our perception, will, and memory, we ventured into the jungle with a fervent interest in joining its heart. The vague memories of those moments bring to mind the sensation of burning throughout my body and an uncontrollable thirst. I experienced an intrinsic yet corrupted impulse to seek truth within the jungle until we encountered the entity that will be attached following this paragraph.
A picture of it? Oh. No, I think that's the main being itself, is that not? It looks like it.
The imminent danger possibly triggered Renan's return to that state of impulsiveness. His shouts in front of my face were the first thing I remembered.
Is that the
before
mouth
regaining
here?
full
That looks like the
consciousness.
mouth.
However, as the following photographs demonstrate, my memory has fragmented into two scenarios that anxiously overlap. The first of which confronts me with Renan.
I love the way it looks. Like,
my
bro
arm,
is terrified. He just
insisting
ran
that we
into
should
it.
flee from there as soon as possible, also shaking my head.
I don't think
The
they
second
died.
scenario corresponds to the photograph's record, in which Renan and one of the indigenous people accompany us suffer a sudden and extremely violent attack perpetrated by a figure identical to the monolith that both we and Matthias de Souza Bruckner admired from one of the sentinels of Urxel.
Two of the
The
sentinels.
creature seemed to have completely engulfed the men's heads, preventing any reaction and will to fight against it.
Wow. So they just overthrow their own... They just pretty much just capture
After
your
the
head.
described events, my memory began to clear, and I do not know how this happened, as did my overall state of consciousness, when I found myself inside the Monteria, drinking from a coconut bowl a brew of extremely rare taste and texture, as thick as mud. One of the indigenous people insisted, amidst discrepant laughter, that I continue drinking. Renan was by my side, with the bowl nearly empty. He sweated as if consumed by fever, and his exhausted and burdened face revealed a migraine that disappeared within minutes. The journey back was much longer, or at least that's how I remember it, with my gaze sometimes lost in the vastness of the night.
So I'm wondering if the people who got basically overridden by the Sentinels, did they die? Because I don't think they died.
Observing the great arm of the Milky Way veining the celestial vault. Upon our return to Bom Jesus,
Because it looked like the Sentinels
our
calmed him
initial
down and
accounts
then
of
they
what
got
had
out of there.
happened were contradictory, to the extent that they sparked heated arguments. And so they remained for months, until at a symposium held in Buenos Aires in 2005, we came to realize that what we had experienced was undoubtedly an effect of the real.
Yep.
If you'd like early access to my YouTube videos.
So, once again, support the original creator, Anomaly. That... I like that. That was pretty fucking cool. So, I don't really have too many thoughts on that, because it was simply, it was straightforward. We're still waiting, because that's still season 2. That's more of season 2. So, I don't know. As it stands, The Real is a pretty good series that he's creating. Like, I see what they're going for. I like it. There hasn't really been too many questions left out, so I don't really have much to say on that regard. Once again, I don't know, if you made it this far, I guess I guess comment bread or something. Comment something stupid. And then, once again, if you want me to react to something or watch something or any of that, just comment down below. Have a good day, good night, or good afternoon, and I'll see you in the next one.